Welcome. I'm Ashley Studholm with the Prince William Conservation Alliance. Stay up to date with our upcoming events by going to our Facebook page at facebook.com/pwconserve or on our website at pwconserve.org. Click on calendar, and there you will find the list of our upcoming events. We organize events on a wide range of topics free of charge with the support of people like you. Become a member or donate by clicking Join Us on our webpage. Thank you for making our work to support healthy and sustainable communities in Prince William County possible.
We are so fortunate to have Elizabeth Ward with us tonight. Elizabeth holds an MBA from the University of Pittsburgh and a Master's of Chemical Engineering from NYU, Tandon School of Engineering. She worked as a chemical engineer for both the US EPA in DC and at DuPont, before working in finance and then becoming a consultant with Washington Advisors. She's the author of The Lender's Guide to Developing an Environmental Risk Management Program. She retired from Washington Advisors and began her volunteer career, where she served 10 years as a treasurer of the Prince William Soil and Water Conservation District, where she, among other things, was instrumental in passing legislation that requires consideration of water, groundwater and surface water when localities are doing their comprehensive plan. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the program over to Elizabeth. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen, and there it is. Okay. And thank Elena, who named this presentation. It was a very cool title. She had the title, we had to make a presentation to go with it. So, Vanishing water from the Rural Crescent to the Occoquan Reservoir. The water on Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. It's been here since the planet itself was formed and is necessary for life. There is, surprisingly enough, no mechanism on Earth for creating quantities of water or even destroying them. What we have is what we've got. So we're the blue planet. And why don't we put up the first participatory question? There it is. On average, how much water does a Virginian use each day? And I won't answer it because I know the answer.
Looks like there's some folks still answering. I'll give you just another second. All right, I'll end the poll and share the results. Take it away.
Okay, the answer is actually 75 gallons a day for personal use. And it varies by state. They are different in different states. It depends on climate. It depends on how urban you are, because some of the older urban environments don't have as much low flow toilets and low flow shower heads and non-leaking water systems that we have here in Northern Virginia and in Virginia itself. Though we are the blue planet, only about 0.5% of the water on Earth is fresh water that is available to us to use. The rest of the fresh water, which accounts for about 3% of the total water on Earth, is either locked away in ice caps, extremely deep groundwater, has been polluted beyond redemption by man, or some other inability to use it. The available supply of water that we have is what is constantly renewed in the hydraulic cycle. The water on Earth just cycles around and around. It flows through the rivers to the ocean, evaporates, falls as rain, and starts all over again. A community becomes unstable if you use up your water resources or they're inadequate to meet the demands of the community. And that's something that doesn't happen all at once. Communities or civilizations tend to grow and use up all the water, and they are wiped out in the historical record by extreme droughts. The need for water is constant and grows with population and wealth. We are in the Potomac River Basin. This is our home. It consists of 14,670 square miles, 5,700 of which are in Virginia. Do please note the little orange dot. Keep that in mind. We will refer to it later, but see where it is. And it contains, the Potomac River Basin contains not only the Potomac River, but it contains all its tributaries, the streets, the streams, the groundwater resources, the Aquacon. Can't see Lake Manassas on this, but that's in there too. It is all of it. And this is from the ICPRB, which is the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin that manages the Potomac's resources for all the water companies. The Potomac and its tributaries supply the water to the more than 6 million people who live in the Washington metropolitan area these days. And quite frankly, without some management and additional resources, it's not enough anymore. Once the waters of the Potomac seemed unlimited, but it's been a long time since that was true. And so the ICPRB manages that. And one of the ways they manage it is by telling Fairfax Water, one of the users of the Potomac River, to draw only from the Aquapon. They balance the load on the Potomac when it happens. The Potomac River and the Occoquan Reservoir are the two main supplies of Fairfax Water, which also supplies all of us in Prince William. The public water supply is primarily from Prince William Service Authority and American Water. Over half of Prince William County's population depends on the Aquapon for drinking water. And the public water supply, depending on where you live, is a mix of either the Potomac, Lake Manassas, or the Aquacon itself. And here we are in the Aquacon watershed. And you can see Prince William County, and there is a significant portion of the watershed. The Occoquan Reservoir, though the low reservoir dates from the 1920s, it was really built in the 1960s. And in the 1980s, was expanded to its current size, which is 7.85 billion gallons. At the time of its expansion, Fairfax began to notice there was a problem. And so they instituted protections for the Occoquan Reservoir. What was happening was runoff, oil and gas from cars and highways, litter, all sorts of stuff was killing the streams and delivering basically dead and polluted water to the Aquacon. The Aquacon is the most urbanized watershed in the nation. So it's really rather remarkable that it survives. And it survives in part because Fairfax created the parkland surrounding it and downzoned a good part of the remaining area they had in the county to 1 house per 5 acres. So they created Fountainhead Park, other parklands in the county, and they downzoned. At the time of the expansion of the Aquacon, Prince William was not as developed and not growing as quickly as Fairfax. The area eastern portion of our access to the Aquacon was already developed with single-family homes, but the western portion was, you know, all agricultural, and so they did nothing. Why don't we put in the second survey question and see what we have?
Okay, so you all can take a guess on where does the water in Occoquan Reservoir come from?
Nancy, no cheating.
All right, looks like we got everybody.
All right, everybody knew it was, or practically everybody knew it was all of the above. There are more than 350 streams and creeks in the county. There was at one time about the turn of the century, and I do mean the 2000, 391 streams and creeks that ran into the Occoquan River. The Aquapon River itself, groundwater feeds the reservoir. It pulls the groundwater. And the Upper Occoquan Service Authority supplies, I believe at this time, more than 40 million gallons of water a day. They clean the wastewater and release it to the Aquacon. So it's really important that they do their job well and that the Aquacon is monitored, but it's also really important that we keep all the streams and creeks that flow into the Aquacon River clean, that we don't have polluted runoff that flows into them, that we have groundwater, which makes up the base flow of the rivers and creeks and streams when it's not raining. When there's no rainwater, what keeps these things flowing is the groundwater. So water comes into the basin from rain and snow. Locally, there's, in the last quarter century, 44 inches a year, though I will say a few years ago, that number was 39. We've had some of the wettest years on record in the last several years, which moved that number up significantly. Climate forecasts, however, that the ICPRB went out and had done, predict that the region will get wetter, the rainstorms will be more severe, the wetter years will be wetter, and the droughts will be more severe and longer. And that is a problem for planning for water. Water management in the Potomac Basin requires planning for droughts, for the seasonal lows. Our demand for water, of course, is highest when water is the lowest. And naturally, in summer, there tends to be less water and there's less groundwater, and yet plants need it. We want to water our lawn. So our demand is highest when the water level is lowest. As part of managing, tracking, the data from all the water utilities is collected and analyzed and studied. So we know how much water is used. We know the quality of water that comes into the water utility. However, 15% of the population in Prince William County drinks from well water. Now, that's not all private wells. There is still one last remaining water system that runs on wells. Decades ago, Prince William County, Manassas, and huge portions of the county drew their water from groundwater wells within the county, but they became contaminated over the years. Most notably, IBM's Superfund site in Manassas. Historically, we haven't adequately estimated the groundwater resources or understood them, and to know if they are adequate or we are using them sustainably. Changing land use in the county is impacting the regional hydrology, the groundwater recharge, and the flow to rivers and streams. So here's the deal on how it works. Why don't we do survey question 3, and then we'll go into how this all works, just to make sure everybody knows what groundwater is.
Okay, go ahead and select your answers. Give everybody a couple of moments. All right.
Okay. Groundwater is, despite the very common perception that it's some underground lake or stream or big tub of water, it's actually the mud and water that fills the cracks and spaces between rocks. It is not a big pool of water. Most notably, if you ever went to the beach and dug a hole until you hit mud in the sand that wasn't in the ocean, you're really looking at a very shallow groundwater table. So that is what groundwater is. And here's how it gets there. When it rains, water falls from the sky and percolates. It is absorbed into the ground. The shallow plants pull the water from the shallow level in the roots, but a fraction of the water goes into, through the soils, into the groundwater basin. So when you have a natural environment, trees and the underbrush and bushes and plants, what happens is about 25% of the precipitation ends up filtering into the groundwater basin. 25% is also absorbed into the trees and the plants. And there's about 10% runoff. And the rest of the water goes into evaporation, back into the moisture in the air. As you add impervious surfaces, driveways, roads, houses, roofs, patios, as you develop and build, the amount of water that percolates into the ground to recharge groundwater decreases, and the amount of runoff increases. So that as you go to 10 to 20%, your infiltration into the groundwater is only 21%. When you get to 35 to 50%, it's only 15% of the water. And by the time you're in an urban environment, only 5% of the precipitation recharges groundwater. The rest of it, there's a small amount that goes into shallow infiltration, making mud, but the rest of it goes into runoff so that you will get flooding. So the more you build, so you have this place, and it was never a problem if anyone lives in Aquapon, and they build a road and they build townhouses, and suddenly every time it rains, you've got flooding. Well, what they did is they messed with the hydrology. So one of the things that you need to think about also, just as an aside and a particular pet peeve with me, is solar farms are not farms. They don't have plants. They have impervious surfaces covering the ground, and they're about 50% impervious surface. They may be raised up off the ground, but they indeed are creating stormwater runoff and preventing the recharge of groundwater. Okay, so here we are in the Rural Crescent, which was created in 1998 as an urban growth boundary to preserve our agricultural heritage, which it didn't really do. It was intended to force redevelopment, brownfield redevelopment along the Route 1 corridor, and the tools they used was to limit development to one home per 10 acres. They downzoned the rural area, and they did not allow sewage and public water supply in it. But slowly but surely, they have been carving it up. The thing is that the Rural Crescent ended up being about water. They didn't start off that way, but if you look at it, it provides protection to the Aquacon. It protects the recharge of groundwater. It protects the density of development, so that it turned out to be our solution for protecting, functionally, for protecting the Occoquan Reservoir. Not only that, residents within the Rural Crescent depend on private wells, the groundwater directly for their drinking water, and they use septic systems for waste disposal. So they need space to have those systems work. And there are limits to the amount of groundwater available to extraction, the aquifer. You can't keep pumping groundwater. You have to have some idea of how much there is and how much is being recharged. If you remember that last one, how much water goes into the ground each year depends on how much you can take out to be sustainable. The two have to be in balance. The thing is, we've never looked at that. The GRACE satellites, and what is GRACE? GRACE is got an official name. What is it? It is the Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiments run by the US and German governments. It is a couple of dual satellites that circle the Earth constantly and measure minor variations in gravity between two places. And what that data tells us is the change in water. So the first GRACE satellites survived until, I believe, 2016, and were replaced in 2018 and are now collecting more data. But the first data group, which was about 14 years of data, they discovered that many of the water basins and groundwater basins in the world were decreasing, that from the beginning of their study period to the end, they had less water. And our basin was one of those areas. Now, we don't have any real monitoring of our groundwaters in Prince William County, but the USGS does have monitoring wells all over the state that it uses for data and research purposes. One of them, 49 feet, is in the Rural Crescent. It is the only groundwater monitoring well we have in the Rural Crescent. And for anybody who wants to have any fun playing with data, it's all available from the government at that link. You can click on it and, play with the data yourself. But what this is, that data goes back to actually 1968. And what the data says is that from 1968 to about 2004, the groundwater level went up and down with seasonality, as it always does, but it remained fairly steady. Then something happened, and the groundwater and the depth to groundwater began to increase, i.e., the water was being used up after 2004. Now, it's true, there was a drought in here, but we had the wettest years in Virginia's history here, and yet the groundwater, the depth to groundwater continues to increase, but only in this well. This is just one well. I don't have, dozens of wells or the hundreds of wells they have in Fauquier County, the dozens of wells they have in Loudoun County. I have just this one well. Remember I told you to remember that orange dot? That orange dot is the location of this well, which happens to be really close to my personal home. So I have watched this well regularly. The Rural Crescent is actually about water, both groundwater and surface water. The Rural Crescent protects the Aquacon watershed that serves all of us for our water supply, be it a private well or the public water supplies. The Occoquan Reservoir contains that 7.85 billion gallons of water that is essential. So where's your water from? Mine's from the ground. So if you live in Manassas South, Dominion Valley, your water comes from the Potomac River and Lake Manassas. Lake Manassas is part of the Rural Crescent and part of the Aquapon watershed. The Corvallis plant is one of the two large water plants in Fairfax County. It's the newer one with a pipe that draws directly from the Potomac. The east system, Woodbridge, Occoquan, Dumfries, Triangle, and Hoadley, draws from the Aquapon. It buys its water directly from Fairfax Water, and that water is drawn directly from the Occoquan Reservoir. And if you happen to live in Bull Run Mountain or Evergreen area, your water comes from the water supply wells. They're actually in the area of the Evergreen Country Club. So Prince William County is in the process of abandoning the protections that the comprehensive plan provided to the ecology by having the Rural Crescent. We need to study how any proposed land use change will impact water resources, groundwater availability, sustainability and quality, and surface water availability, sustainability and quality for all our existing residents and for the ones they're planning for in the Rural Crescent. They are planning for in the growth in the comprehensive plan, rather. They're planning for growth. They want to build a lot more homes in the rural area so that we can all not have water. So here's a chart that looks incredibly complicated. It was done by the ICPRB as part of their required forecast. This is like their comprehensive plan. And what they did is they factored in all the climate projections, the ones that show more water, more severe rainstorms, and the longer droughts. And this is for 2050, when the population will be a bit larger and the climate will be a little bit different. And even though this chart looks really complicated, it really comes down to green good, red bad. Green, they don't run out of water, and red they do. Now these cases, top to bottom, baseline is how they operate now. You want water, you can have water, just pay your water bill. So you want to water your lawn, you want to take a bath, you want to drink your 75 gallons a day, whatever it is, it's yours. Make yourself happy. And the yellow is like they're almost out of water, so that you can see they're very low. They're down to just a touch left. And the red is they run out of water. So only the high flows, the excessive storms, do they not have a problem in 2050? Every other time they have a problem. And these other lines are baseline plus up. This is where they have limits on how much water you have. They put in restrictions. They try to manage water use. And then they start adding additional reservoirs. And so by the bottom here, they've added 13.5 billion additional gallons of reservoir storage. And they still don't make it through a drought. So they're going to have to do some additional planning to make sure that the region doesn't run out of water. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, gee, just buy some more water from the water supply company. We have to think about how much that costs and what the additional reservoirs, the additional infrastructure to meet that demand will be. In 2018, the Virginia legislature amended the underlying comprehensive plan law to include a requirement that the counties plan for the continued availability, quality, and sustainability of both groundwater and surface water resources. In other words, the counties are required to plan to have good quality water available for all its residents, both present and future. What we need to do is to make sure that this process is honestly and carefully carried out. And with high certainty, we know we will have water. And that's it for me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And now we have questions and comments. I know there's one question on the chat about where Nancy answered it, but maybe for everybody about where the Manassas water comes from, water in Manassas.
That is the same as Dominion Valley. It's the Potomac River and Lake Manassas. It's a combination.
I think the question was actually Manassas Park.
Oh, I'm sorry. Whoops.
It's a different city.
Yes, it is. They buy from Fairfax, I believe, directly.
Do you have thoughts on that, Nancy?
I checked their website and they say that they have city wells, plus they purchase from other neighboring jurisdictions.
Yeah, they buy from Fairfax Water. They
Yeah.
still have a city well. Ooh. They
City well
also have-
system.
They also, by the way, have the highest water rates in the region.
Wow.
Far.
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
May I? Okay. So let's pretend that I'm a builder in Prince William County, and I have assured people that I can pipe in the water. Why do I get preference over people that are just going to be putting a well in?
I have no idea.
I don't either. But that is what is happening in this county. If you can tell me that you're going to pipe water in across the dump and over across the highway and into a corner, a little corner of my neighborhood, when we all have wells, what's up with this? I just don't get it. But they get preference. These builders that say that they can pipe in the water.
This
Tammy,
is
do you-
Tammy Spinks. I'm sorry, Sharon, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm not sure I understand your question, but I do know state code prohibits, we're not allowed to prohibit water supply. If the builder is willing to incur the cost to run that pipeline, then the county has no obligation or no, the only thing they can do is approve it. So I'm not sure, I really don't understand what you're saying
I'm
about preference.
saying that if we have to endanger the waterways and our surface water into the Aquacon and screw with the ground thing and then pump in water, what are we doing? Why are we doing that? Doesn't make any sense.
Do you have a comment, Elizabeth? It's hard.
It
Just,
is
we all have question marks over our heads, right?
right.
And Elena, you had a thought, a question.
Sorry, I'm multitasking, making chicken tenders and roasted asparagus. So
Oh, we'll be right over.
multitasking. Elizabeth, actually, I have a question for you, and this is going to require follow-up. We have, it appears to me, a twofold disaster with putting data centers in the Rural Crescent. One, of course, is the impervious surfaces that they create, because they're just, millions of square feet of concrete. But the other concern that nobody talks about, except, I know the coalition has brought it up. We focus the most on transmission lines because that, of course, is the visual that you see. But the water consumption for data centers is, we're talking like Olympic-sized swimming pools. And I know that they do have some gray water. I know that they do recycle some, but we have not explored the double impact of, one, the impervious surfaces and the amount of water that they require. I just see that as being a really deadly combination for...
It is, especially when the water could be completely recycled. Data centers in the West, where it is drier, they are required to recycle all the water. It's one of the reasons why it's cheaper to have data centers here. Power is cheaper, land is cheaper, water is cheaper. It's like those alien science fiction movies where the aliens come to your planet to strip it of all its resources.
Yes.
I think of the Western companies coming to Virginia to strip us of all our resources.
And people are not, and the board is not putting that into their calculus, first of all. we don't make that much money from them because our tax rate is so cheap. But in addition to all the infrastructure we end up paying, but now when you calculate the loss of our available water, I just, it's actually like my head is like exploding because I don't understand how they are so short-sighted and not even asking the questions. So I really feel like this, the water consumption and the water needs for residents has really got to start being front and center. And we're going to have to make that happen, even if we have to go before the board and take 10 people and take our 3 minutes and give your presentation. And I'm actually not joking. 3 minutes apiece, your presentation, we all take a slide.
I'm with you.
Okay.
I think that has to be done. You have to beat them over the head and shoulders. We've talked and talked and talked, and they won't listen to us.
I mean, like, I'm wondering, where are these? Why do we not have, do we have anybody from planning on this program, Kim?
No, not that I know of.
Elena,
They're
Yeah.
just not paying
Tammy, I have been talking about this in front of the Planning Commission and the board since 2015. Doesn't matter who's sitting in the chair, meaning the chairperson, that's what I mean. They ignore it because it's not convenient. But it's really going to take folks like Elizabeth and her other water professionals to stand up and testify.
I mean, I'm not
We
kidding.
need the experts.
Yeah, maybe Elizabeth starts the first slide and then we literally come in with each slide after her and we time it out with our 3 minutes. And that's how I get this presentation. I'm not kidding.
Well, we can follow up on that. I know that I have talked to several people and mentioned at speaking at the board, the new requirements for assessing water and including that information in the comprehensive plan. And to date, everybody just kind of stares at me.
Well, Elizabeth made a very, very clear and good presentation.
Yes,
Anybody,
Yeah.
you know, can really, really see and start thinking, man, we are paving the county. This is not a good thing.
Yeah, Janine Lawton has a question to move on a little bit. Janine?
Hi. I guess my question was, can the county be sued to prevent them from, building in the Rural Crescent?
Don't know. I was kicking around it with some people what it might cost to sue the county for performance under assuring us that we would have adequate water resources, because that's a law. But I don't know.
Wow.
Right, because it's not being done right now.
Right.
One of the
Valerie,
things that the pipeline people, the way they have won is they sue the bejesus out of everybody. They make all of these into legal arguments, and that's where they have made a lot of progress. And I think we need to start considering how to do that. I have another question. In getting people engaged in this conversation, is there any way to say that when you pave over 10 acres, it costs this much in terms of water loss or anything like that?
We don't have any data in this county. Fauquier engaged the DEQ and the USGS to research their groundwater resources, because except for the reservoir in Warrington, Lake Warrington, Fauquier depends entirely on groundwater, and they started to have their groundwater basins fall by 100 feet, that their central wells started to lose water and they couldn't get a head up for the fire hydrants. So they sort of have a problem of having enough water. So they are investigating how to solve that problem and are learning a lot about the various geologies in Fauquier County and the recharge rate, so that they know in this soil here, it recharges it so much a year. And if you pave over this spot, you reduce groundwater by more than if you pave over here. That the crystalline rock in Marshall is faster to dry up, but quicker to recharge than some of the soils down by 28, which is where Prince William comes into it. So no, we don't have any data. We have one measly well that I squeezed all the data out of and borrowed some graphing tools from Loudoun County to do. We have one well. There are hundreds in Fauquier County with hydrogeologists and geologists digging trenches to look at the soils and the rock to understand it. So no, we know nothing about our groundwater. It's just down there.
Oh,
Wow.
boy.
So
Martin.
what can we do to start changing that?
Well, let's
Would
let
be a
Martin
first
ask.
step.
Let's let Martin.
Oh, thanks, Kim, and thanks, Elizabeth, for a great presentation. And this actually was my question, so it was maybe about to be answered. But Elizabeth, you mentioned Fauquier and their work with studying their groundwater. Is that an expensive thing? Because we've been talking about that in Prince William for many years, but it's never nobody's ever done it. So,
As I understand it, the contract to the USGS and DEQ was $500,000.
I'm sorry, how much?
$500,000.
Oh, $500,000. Well, yeah, that's not bad at all. So, and that's going to tell them relatively what their groundwater looks like throughout the whole county.
And hopefully how to solve their problems in terms of public supply and how their water is used, discharged, recharged to basins, how to balance and sustainably use their groundwater. There's a lot of wiggle room in Virginia where there's lots of rain, that there are things you can do to try and overcome a hurdle. So it's supposed to. The study should be done this spring. And I'm biding my time to go, or I guess I'm going to end up phoning Brad White down at the DEQ to kind of, what'd you find out, sort of thing.
Well, 500,000 seems like a bargain. That seems like the first thing we need to do to get a baseline on all this.
I think it'd be cool.
Wow.
Yeah, that would be a good positive step forward. Just because we're still on topic, Valerie has a question about the wells, and then we're going to go to Tanya and Dave. So Valerie first.
Hey, everybody.
There you are.
Good to see you.
Hey.
Hey, yeah, so great question. Great presentation, Elizabeth. One question for you. So how did the USGS determine where they wanted to put those wells? And is there anyone else doing any research into this? Any other groups besides them?
What the USGS did with that particular well is, I believe it was an existing well, and they went to a farmer and said, can we put our equipment on your well? They actually just got permission to observe and monitor a well, and it used to be manually done. Around 2000, they changed to automatic. So all the equipment is installed in the well. I actually inquired about to DEQ and the USGS and discovered that wells can be entered into the program, that I could actually put the equipment on it and get them to adopt my well if I had a well and was willing to do that. So, but that's, they don't, though the USGS did drill the wells in Herndon near their headquarters. Mostly the wells are existing wells that they just adopted and put equipment on.
Okay, Tanya. Yes,
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was unmuted. I'm really bad about that. I wanted to find out, we're under the Chesapeake Bay watershed, correct? And we're
Yes.
supposed to be following all these laws to make sure our water is protected. So how are they skirting these laws to be able to, because they have to have done these studies, supposedly to be, these developers had to have done all these studies when they are near our waterways, whereas the one that they just approved over here is, how are they skirting this with their environmental studies?
I don't know, but knowledge of the TMDL and the requirements of the Chesapeake Bay cleanup are not well understood by like the Planning Commission, by various staff members, and by the supervisors. I bet you if you walked up to them and asked them, you know, what concrete actions they're taking to address the TMDL and how are they factoring that into the planning and the comprehensive plan, they'd say, huh?
Yeah.
Yep.
I
believe that.
As an aside, the Aquapon, the Aquacon itself picks up a lot of the nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment that flows in, and it stays in there. One of these days, it will have to be dredged,
Right.
but you know, just as other dams do. But it basically picks up and stops that from moving into the Chesapeake Bay. So it serves as a buffer. And a retainer of that. It, you know, if we were talking about the TMDL, I could pull out the statistics I have somewhere on this computer of exactly how much nitrogen and phosphorus and sediment get removed by the Aquapon.
Right. And so I know that they've said that they are putting in more trees and everything in the development. And I have to say, there are a couple that are on the board that probably don't know much about the TDML. There probably isn't. But I think that they originally were not okay with what was going on over by Lake Jackson. But we have the western side of the district that are saying, well, it's time for you guys to carry the load. So the Rural Crescent needs to go. You need to carry the load for these developments. So I don't know how to make them change their viewpoints of that. That's because they're like, look, we're all developed out. It's time for this area to get developed. And so I don't know how to get them to change their idea that you need green space. You have to have green space. You have to have, I mean, they know. I mean, we just built that at Belmont Bay where, you know, and they're supposed to be teaching them about the buffer zones and the estuaries and all this, our students, but, you know, what are they going to do right now? That's what I don't understand, how they don't get that.
And they're totally unresponsive when you ask them questions like that.
Well, I would agree with that because I've been asking about the comp plan and the water evaluation, and I can't get an answer. So maybe there's a few things that we can do a letter writing campaign into the board and people can go speak. And we can make suggestions about that in our follow-up email. And if you have any, please email us, alliance@pwconserve.org. And Dave, you're on.
Thank you. Elizabeth, nice presentation. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
You had an interesting point on one of your slides that is certainly not on the topic we've been discussing, but I'm interested to know more about it. You said that solar farms are inherently amenable to groundwater recharge, and it just strikes me. I mean, there must be a variety of designs for solar farms, a way to engineer them so that they don't have that effect. Is that uniformly true, or is that just true of the common solar farms that have been installed to date?
It's only true of the common solar farms that have been installed to date. Understand that a solar panel, a solar rack, is impervious. So when you're installing a lot of impervious surfaces, in order to counteract it, you have to spread it out and have a stormwater management plan.
Correct.
Where you're directing the stormwater into places where it can be still. Impervious surfaces make stormwater move faster. It hits the solar panel, it slides really fast. What you want to do is capture it, slow it down, and let it percolate into the ground.
Sure.
That has not been done because a lot of these solar farms are in places that are not as wet as Virginia. They are much more arid. They're put out in the desert. Now we're installing them in Virginia, and we've done a whole slew of them, but they are actually, and they have been, exempt from stormwater management planning. There are stormwater requirements. It does not cover solar plants. So we are pushing with various legislation to try to make them subject to that. But also, importantly, you need to plan for the infiltration. And I have a nephew. I was going to say a friend, but it's actually a nephew who works in installing. He's an engineer for installing a lot of these solar farms. And what they've run into is they've got tremendous erosion because the water is just flowing. And now they have to solve these problems. And so he sent me all his pictures. They're adorable of like what a mess this is.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Chair, we're circling back around to the list. And there you are.
Hi, everybody. So my question was, is there a, I'm trying to go back, it's been a little while. I said, does the timeline of water disappearance depend on the speed of development? If development of the Rural Crescent is inevitable, is there a way to measure a safe rate of development in order to safeguard the water table? Or are we already at max capacity?
Don't know. We don't have enough information to know if we're already at max capacity. And speed of development really has very little to do with groundwater and hydrology, except the faster you do it, the less you're going to be able to see and adjust. So that speed is not an element, but it's how many people, how much human waste, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. It's how much water the people are pumping out of the groundwater basin and how much impervious cover you put on. So you pave more of the areas, you add more people, and so you're getting less groundwater recharge and more drinking and more demand for water. In addition to more people, more roads, more building, you get pollution. And when you build, you actually get erosion, you get sediment. So there is a lot of activity from construction that brings contamination. And then just the existing traffic, people, trash, litter, human waste, all those things contribute to the degradation of a watershed.
So is the theory that the 1 house per 10 acres development methodology has kept things at bay and kept the water table where we need it to be at a safe level? So if we were to continue doing that, would we still be okay?
It's a buffer.
Not entirely sure, actually. We would have to make sure that's enough. We may require some other activities to do that. But it's, you know, what we've done is carve out sections of the Rural Crescent and put high density housing so that and make bigger roads and wider roads to move that traffic better. So we've got water moving, we've got bigger roads, we've got less rural area. And so the streams are being impacted and being polluted by runoff, and the groundwater is being diminished. So we need to look into it to see if we are close to it. But the data from the Gray satellite tells us our water supply is diminishing, the groundwater is diminishing.
Thank you so much for answering the questions with such detail. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, and Dan, you had some interesting comments maybe you'd like to share?
I'm assuming that you said Dan.
I did.
I was surprised when you said I had interesting comments. But it's a fascinating subject. But my comment was that we kind of have to start somewhere. And what struck me was that Fauquier study, which sounds like a perfectly reasonable thing to be asking for. And it shouldn't be one that, you know, kind of offends anybody. You know, we wouldn't be taking sides against developers or for anyone in particular, other than the good of everybody in the county, to at least understand or have some kind of factual data that tells us whether we have a problem and how large the problem is. I'm not sure about the cost. 500,000 doesn't sound like a lot when you're looking at some of the budgets we're spending, but or some of the budgets we're developing. But it seems, you know, if we're going to argue with them or make a presentation to them, them being the Planning Commission and or the Board of County Supervisors, to go forward with something that's, you know, kind of doable and provides us with something usable for the future, might be a way to go.
It might be. That's a really good thought. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sarah.
Yes, thank you, Kim. Great presentation, Elizabeth. I want to go back to the data centers for just a minute. I think I put a question in the chat, but never mind. Are they paying, besides swallowing up all the water, are they required to pay any sort of a surcharge or tax or fees for the use of all this water? Or are they just taking it? If somebody could address that, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
They pay the, if they're using public water supply, they pay the water rates that are appropriate to their category. So there are different rates for residential and various volumes. And you can look in the rate charts to see that. And also in the industrial zone that they have, the county builds the pipe from the public water supply to the data center, the way they did for that brewery. It to something brewery by George Mason, so that they will bring in public water for that. If you're in the, you know, so that they bring the water pipe to them and then they just pay the public rate.
Thank you.
Tammy.
Hi there. Full disclosure, I'm an employee of Fairfax Water. So I'm a little bit biased and very proud to say I'm an employee of Fairfax Water. I did thank you, Aaron, or excuse me, Elizabeth. It was a wonderful presentation. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. This is near and dear to me. With all that said, I did want to just point out a couple of things. The drinking water supply is pretty stable. Fairfax Water's been very progressive.
Oh, they're way ahead of the game. They've got the quarry coming, the Sexsmith quarry, the Vulcan quarry. Other parts of the system have to build. Fairfax has excess capacity. It's building the crossover from Corvallis to the Aquacon so that the Aquacon can feed the entire county in case.
Well, wait, we're already there. We can, in a snap of a finger, Lorton or Griffith, the plant off of Aquapon, the Griffith plant, that can feed the entire county and our wholesalers at the switch of a finger. It can happen today, and it does happen occasionally. Corvallis out in Herndon, that's our flagship, even though it is the oldest. The Herndon plant could do it all day, every day, 365 days a year.
The Corvallis could do, I think, 540, which is more than the system needs. So there's redundancy in Fairfax Water. It's a great
absolutely
and
by design,
and it is well thought out. Other parts of the Potomac water basin, not so well thought out. You know, when there was that spill in the Potomac River, what Fairfax Water did was shut off, you know, the Potomac, and
I know exactly what they did.
And they sent a little car of people out from the lab to go sample the Potomac and see what it was that the spill was, and
they couldn't figure out what it was.
Yes, and whether the plant could treat it. No, they do a great job. You know, and the county, you know, and they've been very active at buying the protections for that. I was surprised that they didn't have anything to say to Prince William County and their plans for the Rural Crescent. Like,
me too.
So crazy.
But let me just say, our previous general manager retired a little over a year ago, and he was very Rural Crescent, very supportive of the Rural Crescent. And he did work with Ruth Anderson on a number of occasions to encourage her to be supportive of the Rural Crescent. There were many meetings and conversations that I facilitated and made happen. But we see where that all played out. But with all of that said, I forgot what else I wanted to tell you, but the Herndon is, the Corvallis plant is the oldest plant, and the Griffith plant down there on Aquacon, that is the newest state-of-the-art plant, and both are capable of serving our customers with the flick of a switch. It's pretty cool. I would encourage, right now we can't do anything with COVID, but once these restrictions are lifted, we do tours of our plants, and I would encourage anybody to, especially for schools, take those tours. It's very, even UOSA, they're fascinating tours to take.
And the Aquapon laboratory is also wonderful.
The OWL, yeah, we need to get them involved. Yes, that's what I wanted to tell you. Thank you for bringing that up. It's a disappointing, but I also wanted to point out Fairfax County and Fairfax Water are two distinct, separate entities.
Absolutely.
Fairfax County downzoned around the Aquacon, but Fairfax Water has now implemented an approval process for development along their shoreline, or along the reservoir. It's not as aggressive as I'd like it to be, but it's a start.
Thank you. Sunny, do you have comments and questions? It's good to see you here. And I don't see you. Hopefully you're still here.
Is he there?
I don't know. I'm looking to see anybody else have a question. I'm looking through the chat.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
What's the difference between a retention pond and, I think the newer way that they're doing it is a catch and release or something? We had an old retention pond at Independent Hill at the fire station, and we brought it to the attention of the county. Apparently it went back to the 40s and had never been modified or updated. And so they updated it. And then whenever they built the new fire station, it's no longer a holding facility, but they have like these piles of rocks that are in cages, and they go from, it's kind of odd because they have a gas distribution area where they fuel their rigs, and then they cross the street, and then it's a big gutter where the water runs down. And then they have like 3 different walls of these rocks and a very small hole that goes through a little bit of a dam, I would call it, down into the stream. So it releases slower, but it still releases. And I think in the past, potentially it held our groundwater so that the water near our area had more water, but now it flows. And in the storms recently, like this past summer, there was so much water that flowed that we had at least 3 or 4 roads that have washed out, and they've had to put new drainage underneath the roads, and they've had to repave above the drainage pipes. And I don't know I think it has something to do with the quantity of water, and I think it has something to do with them releasing the water instead of holding the water there like they did for years and years. Does any of that make sense, or is it something that's new that the county is doing?
Well, stormwater management regulations in Virginia have changed, and there are requirements and there are filtration requirements. I assume that this was according to book, but it could be that the design is inadequate for the flow that you're having now, or it just could be another factor that we've had so much rain in the last few years and such big storms that you're seeing just 2 different things. The design you described is a standard design, so, and it's part of the state regulations, but you could query it,
right?
You know, and have them come out and review it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just concerned they spent quite a bit of money on 4 roads and 4 drainage pipes through VDOT, and I don't know that the storm water management people are talking to the people at VDOT if they're connecting their, you know, how they're running things, not quite realizing how they're connected. So.
Thanks, Tammy. And I want to give Joe Fontanella is here. He serves on the Planning Commission, and he has some tips for us in speaking to other commissioners. You still here, Joe?
Yeah, hey, thank you for that. I don't know that I have specific tips, but I would say this to you all. I think I'm probably the only planning commissioner on here, at least from what looking at the group that are on here. But I think the focus of our conversation with people has to be about the value that the Rural Crescent provides to everybody in terms of protecting the watershed that provides our drinking water, that addresses the concerns that people have about taxes and costs of infrastructure. And, you know, a lot of folks that are on the fence on this, they hear about the bucolic nature of it and everything. And I got to tell you, for a lot of folks, it does not register with them. I think what really registers with people is how do we protect the environment? How do we protect our drinking water source? How do we ensure that our taxes don't start going up because we've given the developers the key to the cages and allowed them to just develop, you know, all over the Rural Crescent? And I think the other thing we need to do is we need to clarify really what the Rural Crescent is and what it's not. If you've been seeing articles in Inside Nova and Prince William Times and some others, you're seeing things that talk about the 117,000 acres and how it's 52% of the county, and you know it's a playground for the elite. What is not well communicated is that a good bit of the Rural Crescent is already developed. There's not a lot of land really left to develop. And this idea that, you know, a small group of people are husbanding resources that others could use is just not true. And so I would encourage you without emotion, when you see these articles, to respond to them in comments and reach out to your planning commissioners and to your Board of County Supervisors and reemphasize kind of the key talking points of why we even have a rural boundary. Yeah, there's a byproduct of it. You know, the byproduct is we preserve open space and we have a lot of outdoor activities and agritourism, agribusinesses we can enjoy, but it was really intended as a tool that is to protect taxpayers from infrastructure costs and to keep your green dollars. And I really think we need some consistent messaging with that. I think the other thing that you've probably seen is there are groups out there who've gotten really kind of ugly in their responses. And I would just suggest when you find people trolling your social media accounts or responding with negative comments or nasty comments, to just let it roll off your shoulders and stick to the talking points and just don't engage them. I don't know. Does anybody have any questions of me? I probably can't answer 99% of them, but I'll do my best.
Well, we'll do our best to line up and keep you all busy thinking about this good topic.
Well, yeah, and I think we really, you know, Supervisor Vega put forth a resolution to address the need for an Occoquan watershed overlay district, and I really think that we need to continue to push that as a mechanism to protect our future. And that future really relies on protecting that watershed, and that really ties back to land use issues. So you can't address one without the other. And I think it could be a very useful tool to us.
I would agree, and perhaps calling for a groundwater study, such as Elizabeth has talked about, is a good way to move in that direction. That would be a baseline for starting an overlay district.
And I'll tell you, you know, none of us are experts, and many of you are. And I really have to tell you, from my perspective, I really appreciate you lending your expertise to a lot of our problem solving. But the best way to get a supervisor, in my opinion, to act on something that they're passionate about is to help them with the homework, so that they're armed with good information that's defensible, that they can easily understand and kind of help them through the wargaming process of dealing with naysayers. And I guarantee you that Supervisor Vega is absolutely on board with that. And if you can help us help her be prepared, you know, she'll go to the mats with all of us on these issues.
Mm-hmm. That's really good to know, and I'm not surprised. Elizabeth, we're coming back to you for comments.
Me?
Yeah. You're our expert.
I think I made all my comments, didn't I?
We're all so much more knowledgeable now. Does anyone else have a comment or a question? Time to jump right in.
I have something. Is it possible that we could form a group with Elizabeth and you, Kim, and Joe, and help build our idea of what the water research and due diligence has to be included in the comprehensive plan, or should be in the comprehensive plan, or might be in the comprehensive plan, to keep us from stepping in this trap every time we go to talk about water and get blown off.
Right.
Nobody seems to care but us.
Well, I think we're one step down that path. Hopefully with this presentation can help open that door. And maybe we can join with Midco and have another meeting and explore opportunities.
Hey, Kim, this is Joe. I hate to jump in here, but I feel like I have to just say something about this. I'm going to tell you, I've been on the Planning Commission about a year right now, and you know, I've had to deal with the planning staff on a number of things, and they're good people and they're earnest and they're trying to do their job, and there's a lot of pressure on them to do things a certain way. And I can tell you right now, the Planning Commission may be a venue for you. A lot of people would argue that it could be more effective, but I can tell you right now that you have to get to the board. The board has got to be the ones that direct activity. The planning staff has limited ability to do that. And so helping compose resolutions and ideas that are saleable and resonate with the majority of the board members is important. And so, you know, we've probably, a bunch of us have individually talked about how we do that. And I really think that we have to take an environmental angle with the majority of these folks. It's the only angle I think that will work. And so I would, groups are great and we can work towards these goals, but it has to be a very deliberate campaign. And as has been said, yes, the Rural Crescent, the Planning Commission is going to hear some of these recommendations that came out of the staff about the Rural Crescent with TDRs and PDRs and CR1 and everything. I believe the real threat to the Rural Crescent is the comprehensive plan. And so these things that are coming up in the near term could chip away, but really the effort's got to be in the comprehensive plan, and that has to go through supervisors to get their ear. So
Well,
sorry,
I would totally agree.
Sorry
And
for the soapbox, but that's just the way that I see it from my optic.
And I personally feel very strongly that water is something that should be front and center in this conversation right now. To date, it really hasn't even been mentioned or considered in the comprehensive plan or in discussion of the Rural Crescent. So we're really delighted that Elizabeth was here. And I want to say that this video will be up on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it again and get the parts that you missed or have questions about and share it around. And certainly email supervisors and share the link with them and explain why they should really watch it.